known as the man who knows everyone in Washington. John Gizzi is more than a journalist. He's a walking archive, a trusted voice, and a fixture in the front row of the White House press corps. From his years at Human Events to his current perch at Newsmax, John has earned a reputation for being fair, fearless, and fiercely curious. He's interviewed heads of state, tracked political trends before they had names, and never missed a chance to ask the question others were afraid to pose. What sets John apart is his ability to build bridges across party lines, whether he's chatting with a freshman congressman or a former president. He brings the same respect, insight, and genuine curiosity. In a town often divided, John Gizzi remains a connector, someone who listens, learns, and leaves his mark without demonizing others. So today, we're honored to sit down with the man behind the notebook to talk shop, stories, and the soul of journalism. John, thank you for being my guest today. I'm honored to have you.
Senator, about the only thing a gentleman can do after an introduction like that is die.
Well, we don't want that.
No.
So you worked at Human Events, Ronald Reagan's newspaper of choice, periodical of choice, conservative publication. You currently work at Newsmax. That's a conservative network, but you have managed to have the respect of your colleagues on the other side of the aisle. You've had managed to have the respect of members of Congress both sides and have friendships on both sides. What can you tell us and our listeners in this day of hyper partisanship and polarization in the United States? What's your key? What's the secret?
First, you never say bad things or call names. Ronald Reagan had disagreements on issues, but he never personalized a disagreement with anyone when he was governor of California and later he was president. And that was key to him winning over 65 Democrats in the House to vote for his Tax and Budget Act in 1981. Now, transferring that to the world of journalism, reporting the news, I'd say when you show respect to Democratic members of Congress, to liberals in the White House press room, oh yes, they're still there, it's rewarded. They may not even like you, but at least they'll grudgingly concede he listens to me and shows respect. The second thing is never lose touch with anyone, no matter what they do. And I'll give you a personal example. Former Congressman, Joe Walsh of Illinois, became one of the first Republicans to repudiate Donald Trump, and now he switched to the Democratic Party. This is the first congressman elected in 2010 as a Tea Party enthusiast now. He is conservative across the board in his voting record, and then he changed completely. Some say went over to the dark side. I don't say that. I'd say we disagree on something, and we remain friends and can have common ground. For example, what Democrat to talk to in the House on a certain measure coming up, who among the Democratic senators might be the next to break and vote to reopen the government. And by the way, I have been in Joe Walsh's home, had dinner with he and his wife, and he's been in my home, and I consider him a friend. Former Congressman John LaBoutillier, a Republican for Harris, was the youngest member of the 1980 Reagan class of 55 Republican House members. He is 27 then. Today, a little bit older, he cannot stomach Donald Trump, and he endorsed his opponent and says so. We do a radio program together for the National Association of the Blind, and we always show respect with one another. That's key. And finally, the simple fact of remaining in contact with people, even when their personal or professional disagreements come up, is critical. My Christmas card list is up to 1,100 now, and I always remember birthdays. And even if I've had a particular falling out with someone, a disagreement on an issue, I say happy birthday, Merry Christmas, Happy Hanukkah, and you know something? They do too. That's Gizzi's law. Treat one another as you would have them treat you. It pays.
Oh, that's a that's a great answer, and I'm honored to be on that Christmas card list. And
And birthday.
as a recipient, I can tell you that's a lot better than an email, which is or a text, which seems to be the way of the day today.
Mhm.
So, just evidenced by your first answer, you are an unbelievable source of knowledge of American politics. You've been called the human almanac.
Mm.
So what's your I recently talked to a congressman and he told me John Gizzi knows more about the history of my district and the politics of my district than I do.
Oh,
So what's your secret to remembering it all?
well, for one thing, um, I still love to read newspapers every day. And occasionally something will come up in the paper, a name or something about a district. And I immediately start going to the Almanac of American Politics or to the Congressional Quarterly book on it, or yes, using Google to find out things. But I have to say, sacrosanct is personal contact with people and listening. When you talk to someone like your predecessor, John Paul Hammerschmidt, he would relay not only the history of his district, his first losing race for Congress, but recall the races that led to Arkansas becoming a Republican state, campaigning with the late Winthrop Rockefeller, your first Republican governor since Reconstruction, and then how you became the first senator from the Razorback state since Reconstruction. Republican senator, I should say. And of course, Mike Huckabee's long tenure was preceded by Winthrop Rockefeller, Frank White, and, we have the history right there in the state. But that largely comes from listening to others. And as you say, I'm a curious person. I like to follow up and read more when they tell me things.
And you remember it all. It's
Mhm.
an encyclopedic knowledge of these districts across the country. Everybody's impressed, especially me.
Mm.
You've covered. I mean, what a span you've covered from President Reagan to Donald J. Trump. Uh, you've had unbelievable experiences all around the world. Are there any special moments that just give you chills, just bring goosebumps as you think about the moments you've experienced?
I have here in my home, and I can't get to it right now, a photograph of the last time I was with President Reagan, which was when he was a former president at his office in Los Angeles on June, the first Tuesday of June, 1992. I remember that date because I was there covering the California Senate primary, which was very exciting. That's when the Golden State was competitive. Um, and President Reagan signed a pub note, a letter about his support for human events. And we were going to use it in a subscription drive. Well, he gave me the letter, signed it, and he said, "You make good use of this. I'm addicted to your publication." And I was moved. At the time, uh, the woman I was seeing, whom I eventually married, everywhere I'd go, I'd send her a postcard and I'd get someone to sign it. And I mentioned this to President Reagan, and I said, "Would you sign this postcard?" And he said, "I'll do it. and he said, but you have to promise me something. He says, they tell me my signature is valuable, so it might not ever get out of the post office. If you really care about this young lady, you'll deliver it personally to her. And he signed the postcard. As soon as I got back, I gave her the postcard. I went right to her home without unpacking or changing or anything and gave it to her. And she went on to be my wife.
Yeah, and what a love story you've had. That's a great story. Thanks for sharing that.
Mhm.
So you've shared cigars or coffee or a drink with senators and candidates across the country. Who do you think who are a couple of your best storytellers? You're a unbelievable storyteller. It's one reason I enjoy you so much. You are a great storyteller. Who are some that you members that you've come across that had great stories?
The late Senator Strom Thurmond I covered when he sought his last term in 1996, and he was about 96. I brought my young intern, who was very excited to meet him and had done a lot of reading on him, and he proceeded to bring the past to life. He said, for example, he had been to a National Party convention every 4 years, going back to 1932. And he said, I was Democrat then, and I supported Governor Roosevelt on all 4 ballots. And he said, I thought he was our best candidate, and he could do something about that terrible depression. Who would call FDR Governor Roosevelt but Strom Thurmond? He also answered my intern's question about running for president on the states' rights ticket by pointing out that they carried 4 states and lost, and he was at President Truman's inauguration. Truman and the Vice President, Alben Barkley, came down Pennsylvania Avenue in an open car, and Thurman and his wife waved at them. Barkley smiled and waved back. Truman grabbed his hand and said, "Don't you wave at that so-and-so." And he said he was he did some good things, I suppose, like dropping that bomb to end the war. And he said, but he could also be a very, very small person toward people who disagreed with him, like General MacArthur and me. And he brought the past to life. He was a marvelous raconteur. And I asked him about Senator Joe McCarthy. I said, you served with him. What did you think of the charges he made about communism in government? He said, I didn't know him well. He was censured by the time I got there, and he died a few years later. But based on the papers of the Kremlin, we know that there was considerable merit to what he said about communists in government. And he said, based on my experience as a lawyer and a judge, had I been in the Senate at the time, I would have been very, very inclined to vote against censure. As I said, he could bring the past to life, and my intern was spellbound with it. I think he was one of the great storytellers that I knew
I,
in office.
of course, he spanned so many decades in Congress and in
Right.
American politics. I got to serve with him during my time in the U.S. Senate, and even in those early, not toward the end when he became very frail, but he was it would exercise every day, do push-ups every day. He stayed vigorous mentally for right up into his 10th decade. A very amazing person. I remember Bob Dole uh, talking about talking about Senator Thurman said, I want to live a long time, so I follow Strom around and eat what he eats and drink what he drinks. And he did live a long, full life.
Right.
So I know that as much respect as you show other people, that doesn't always get returned. Can you think of a real unexpected jab that you received from a politician?
Yes. Uh, former Congressman Peter Kosmeyer of Pennsylvania. In 1991, I was given a check record of a member of Congress, Peter Kosmeyer, which showed that using the House bank, he would be overdrawn by as much as $10,000, $20,000. In other words, he's in the red in his checking account and paying for a gardener for his home, paying for ties from Paul Young's, which is a very expensive clothing store, and other things. And then he would eventually make it up 6 months after writing checks in the red with no interest or penalties charged. And this was the way the House bank operated in those days. There were members who wrote hundreds of checks that way in the red, and they got the biggest reach you could imagine. I have an overdraft account in my bank if I happen to write a check and go over the limit, and they'll cover it for a few days or a week, and then I pay it. This was going on perpetually. In other words, he had banking privileges that few non-members of Congress have. At that time, the Washington Times and other publications were reporting that the House bank had members overdrawing their account. I called the congressman. He came on the line. I said, I got this from an anonymous source, and I'd like to show it to you to see if it's yours. He said, I'll give you my answer now. It's nobody's damn business. I printed it. That evening, the House is in session, and they are talking about it. And it went on, and the next day, members started immediately paying up their account, and the movement started to close the House bank. And the congressman called me and said, you referred to bouncing checks. I didn't bounce. I wrote an overdraft. And I said, Senator or Congressman, I wanted to come by and see you and discuss this, and you wouldn't. He says, look, I don't want an argument. Well, after that, he denounced Human Events, where I worked, as a radical right-wing publication, smear-mongering, all of the usual charges. And I simply reprinted it. In any event, he lost. And to Jim Greenwood, classmate of yours, and by
Yes.
the way, in no way, shape, or form a conservative.
Right.
And that was it. Now, that said, I protected my source. People would ask me all the time, where did you get his check register from? And that's another thing he hinted. I used underhanded methods to get it. But after all these years of protecting the source, I'm about to reveal it to you. It was the congressman's ex-wife.
That's a fascinating. That's really the genesis, the origin of that bank scandal that impacted Congress and the elections so much. And you were right at the right at the beginning of it.
That
You
was the
basically
first to
get
name someone, an actual congressman with checks overdrawn.
beware of the ex-wives.
Mm-hmm.
So you've seen political tides ebb and flow over the years, over the decades. What's one trend you think today that we're underestimating?
Uh, it's something I have to deal with every day. Uh, and it's the way you and I are communicating without us having to jet to each other's offices. And that is social media, being online, instant communication, if you will. That a politician can say one thing and have rapid response from an opponent immediately, and you can read it all online. Another thing, you've heard the expression, the world is a smaller place. These are not hackneyed words. Just before I called you, I was getting information on the very nip and tuck race for Parliament in the Netherlands right now. Now, that's very important because immigration is a much more incendiary issue than even in the United States. And it's very key to see the outcome of their election, which still has not been determined, and the vote was on Wednesday. The fact is that I can get information from overseas immediately. Last weekend, I had two very good sources in Argentina tell me, don't believe the gloom and doom. President Milei's party is going to win, and he will get a mandate for radical change. And of course, that's significant. Milei is the first libertarian elected president anywhere. Well, I had the news the next day, and they were absolutely right. He did get a mandate of support. And the fact is that at a time before being online, I would have to wait, sometimes hold up articles when I couldn't get the right answer from someone. And if I proceeded without solid information, I'd get in a lot of trouble. And I did. And that has changed everything. One can say for the better, probably. But at the same time, I still miss getting notes in the mail, even from people who didn't like me. And my mother always told me, write a thank you note for everything you do. And I miss that form of communication.
So the old idea of a news cycle is almost gone now. I mean, it goes so quickly because of what
Yes,
you were just talking about.
absolutely. And I will admit to you, it was hard for me, having written for a weekly publication. I would go through several days, go to lunch with certain people, wait for members of Congress to get back to me, wait for a statement from an office, and I had the time. Now, today, people want a story immediately or it grows stale.
Yeah, it's
And
amazing.
Uh, I'll give you an example. I was getting some polls on the Virginia and New Jersey races that are going to be held on Tuesday. Sure enough, I wrote it Thursday, and on Friday, new polls came out. And there'll be others right up to the end.
I'm
My
not
own feeling, by the way, on polls, I always say I only believed in two polls in my whole life, Lech Walesa and John Paul.
Well, that's why I'm not going to ask you for a prediction because it's all going to be history by the time this podcast
Sure.
plays, and we don't want to make you look really good or really bad on your predictive ability. But going with faith and prayer on that may be the best. So I recently had a conversation with Barry Goldwater Jr.,
Yes.
the son of the presidential candidate and Senator Goldwater, and it was fascinating. Of course, Goldwater Jr. is most known legislatively for passing the Privacy Act. But
Yes.
one thing I did not know that I learned in that conversation was he said, "Tim, do you know who my Democratic co-sponsor was?"
Ron Dellums.
But no, it
Ed Koch.
Ed Koch, and
Yes.
I had no idea. And I'm very impressed that you know that, but I'm not surprised. But he said a conservative Republican, and he is very conservative,
Yeah.
and a very liberal progressive Democrat, and we worked together because we found common ground on concern about privacy. So
Right.
I'm wondering your thoughts on the subject of civility and getting along, and whether we will ever see a return to those days when that kind of thing was not unusual. The bipartisanship, the finding common ground, the working together to move policy forward. Uh, do you think we'll ever see that again?
It's very difficult, except uh, I've seen people who had problems with alcohol and they have to go through the mother of all hangovers to take the cure. And maybe we have to reach a point, as one is seen in European parliaments, and this is easy to find on the net, where it breaks out in fistfights on the floor of the parliament until people probably regain their civility. I know there's a lot of folks who love watching Question Time in the British Parliament, and it used to be my esteemed colleague and good friend across the aisle said this, and now it gets downright brutal at this point. And I was in London recently. I don't see that changing for a while. But I'd also point out to you that you can't get everything you want in politics. And very often you have to build coalitions. I was talking recently about the Israeli Knesset, and Prime Minister Netanyahu has a coalition that survives because of ultra-religious parties and ultra-Orthodox. And if they were to leave, his government would fall. But then Netanyahu and his partners would probably reach out to the centrist parties that are there and build a new coalition that would work. He's done it before. Speaker Mike Johnson has no Democrats to turn to do
Right.
that. He's a very convivial, warm person. He knows Jesus Christ well. He doesn't say a harsh word, and as a friend of his told me, he doesn't even swear in private. And yet, if he were to come back and say he got Democrats to support a current measure or something, and would work with them and compromise, he'd be crucified in his own party.
I'm
In other
afraid so.
words, yeah, the Israelis, in a war-torn country with passion for politics raging, they still can compromise better than the traditional parties can in the U.S. House of Representatives.
Yeah, can you think of any time historically that is a parallel to the kind of political climate that we see today? I mean, I think about what's happened with redistricting, which you're an expert on, what's happened
Mm.
with social media and what that's done to polarize the country. Is there ever been a time that is anything like what we're seeing today?
Yes, and this is what gives me hope, because it does turn around for the better. In 1876, the disputed presidential election went on, and where Samuel Tilden, Democrat governor of New York, won the popular vote, appeared to have won the electoral vote, and yet Republicans in the House counted an alternate slate of electors. And in the end, it gave Rutherford B. Hayes, the Republican, victory by one electoral vote, and he lost the popular vote. People were angry. They would get in fights in bars over this. There were signs and buttons saying Tilden or blood. And that's how the country was divided. In 1880, 4 years later, things came back together. Hayes wisely said he would only serve one term. He was out to just heal things, and they had a very fair election that elected James Garfield as president, and the republic went on. You and I were there in 2000 when George W. Bush lost the popular vote, and a dispute over the electoral votes of Florida went all the way to the Supreme Court, which ruled 5-4 to stop the count as it was and not keep recounting. And I remember Democrats calling Bush his fraudulency. He was hissed when he first addressed Congress early in his term. You were there.
Yeah.
And I would go to parties and I'd see people and they would immediately start arguing about the election. Former Senator Don Regal of Michigan and I went at it once at a Christmas party right after the election about it and the fairness. But I'd say he survived. He won another term in a close race. much like Woodrow Wilson. His 2 terms were squeakers. And the republic still stands.
That's, it's a good reminder from a historical standpoint that there is hope, that
Mhm.
there's a way back, and we've gone through tough times before. So thank you for that. As we're approaching the end of our conversation, I want to just give you a chance. Do you have any go-to anecdotes or stories? Well, what it's like covering politics, or anything else you'd like to say, John?
Senator, I tell you, there is nothing like covering politicians and getting to know them after, as you and I have gotten to know each other over the course of 30 years, and eventually sharing personal as well as professional insight.
Very
And I
right.
cite the example most important to me. As a young man at Fairfield University in Connecticut, I would read any newspapers I could get my hands on and any political columns, which they had in our library. And one day I read about a young lady in 1974 who had won a special election for the Michigan House of Representatives. She was 22, youngest person ever to win that. And it was important because this is the Watergate year, the devastating year for Republicans everywhere. And the state legislator had won a seat in the Congress in a special election, but this lady won that seat. And I read about her. And then years later, I read she was the first woman to run for governor. She lost the nomination, and the man who beat her asked her to be his lieutenant governor candidate. That was 1986. It was a bad year. And then I was at an election night party, and I saw someone wearing a large button. And I said, "Who's that?" And the lady said, "That's my sister." And it was the sister of this same woman. And 11 months later, the sister introduced me to her, and I wanted to marry her immediately, which I did after 4 proposals and several years. And we were married for 20 beautiful years and the best years of my life. But it all came, you have to say, from my passion for politics, love of local politics, and eye on new faces coming up. And my wife, Colleen House Gizzi, sadly in her twilight years had dementia and died Christmas Eve of 2022. And to know her was a lasting treat.
Well, she's greatly missed, and thank you for sharing that. Your mutual devotion to one another, I think, is an example to all of us. So, as we wrap up this spirited
Yeah.
exchange with John
And by the
Gizzi,
way, she had
yes,
a motto uh, which influenced me a lot: make friends with your enemies from the last battle. And
that's
she could get a little angry at people, but remained in touch and on friendly terms, including with a lot of liberal Democrats from Michigan.
what a great example for all of us. So, John, we tip our hat to you. You've made a career out of asking the right questions and remembering the answers, whether you're quoting obscure congressional races or recounting a handshake in Michigan. You've brought history alive with a twinkle in your eye and a Rolodex in your brain.
Yeah.
So, in an age of hot takes, I'm thankful that you're there, remaining a cool chronicler of American politics. Thank you so much for joining me today.